I still can't catch my breath from what happened last night. It's midnight now and I'm sitting on my living room couch staring at the locked windows and doors. I kept telling myself it was real, that I wasn't dreaming, but it all happened so fast it's almost hard to believe I'm 25 years old, working as a manager at a McDonald's here in Rio Grande City, Texas. This place is scorching hot practically every month of the year, and the heat can be brutal even at night. My little house doesn't do much to keep cool unless I blast the AC, which I can't always afford. Some nights I open a window to let the breeze in. It's not the safest plan, I know, but the heat can be suffocating. Yesterday evening had been uneventful. I came home late from a shift, microwaved some leftovers, and scrolled on my phone for a while. Exhaustion hit pretty hard, so around 1 a.m., I turned off the lights and slipped into bed. I decided not to run the AC because it felt decently breezy outside and my budget was already tight. So I left my bedroom window open a few inches. I must have fallen asleep almost immediately. Usually I'm a deep sleeper. It takes a lot to rouse me an alarm right by my ear or the pressing need to use the bathroom. But something stirred me awake around 3:01 a.m. The red glow of my clock flickered in the corner of my vision. I remember blinking a few times, trying to figure out why I was up. I didn't feel thirsty or anything. Then I heard it. A strange noise came from my left side. At first I thought it might have been my stomach or some creaking house noise. But after another second, it dawned on me that it sounded like a human passing gas right there in my room. My heart started pounding, and I felt this jolt of fear spread through my chest. I turned my head slowly, scanning the darkness. The only light was from my small alarm clock, not enough to illuminate much, but I could just make out a shape on the other pillow, a person's head. He looked like an older man, maybe in his 70s, lying on his back with his mouth slightly open. My mind struggled to process it. Who was this stranger in my bed? Why was he there? And how did he get in? He must have slipped through the window I had stupidly left open. I almost screamed, but clamped my hand over my mouth. I was terrified he would wake up and do something horrible at that moment. I was overwhelmed by thoughts of what might happen if he realized I was awake. I pictured him lunging at me, or worse. My entire body shook with adrenaline. Trying not to make a sound, I carefully reached for my phone on the nightstand. My fingers fumbled, but I managed to grab it. I slowly lifted the blanket inch by inch and quietly set one foot on the floor. Every movement felt agonized and loud in the silence. Miraculously, the old man stayed asleep with my phone clutched against me. I tiptoed out of the room. The door squeaked faintly as I slipped into the hallway, and I held my breath, expecting to hear movement behind me. But nothing. I made it to the bathroom on the other side of the house and locked myself inside. Dialing 911 felt surreal. My voice trembled as I explained the situation. The operator asked if there had been any forced. I quickly told them no, that I'd left my bedroom window open. They stayed on the line with me as I tried to steady my breathing. I kept imagining the man waking up, wandering the house, and trying to find me after about 10 minutes. The knock at my front door finally came. "Police, open up," they called. I ran to let them in, practically shaking from head to toe. 2 officers entered and I led them to my bedroom, sticking close behind, one of them for protection. The officer flipped the light switch and I braced myself to see this stranger still lying there, or worse, waiting. But the bed was empty, the covers were a little disheveled, but there was no sign of the old man. We checked the closets under the bed and the entire house. All of it was clear. I felt a mix of relief and confusion. How on earth did he get out without me hearing? The window was still open. So maybe he slipped away into the darkness. As soon as I left the room, the officer told me to keep my windows locked and call them again. If he returned, I could barely speak as I thanked them. They left and I stood in my silent house. My heart still pounding, I couldn't bring myself to go back to the bedroom. I grabbed a blanket and set up camp on the living room couch, checking every possible entry point. Before I tried to calm down, sleep never came tonight. I'm still on the couch wearing the same clothes I had on earlier, afraid to change or let my guard down. I've tried triple-check the windows, doors, and even the closets. I've considered pushing a dresser in front of the bedroom window, but that still doesn't make me feel any safer. I keep thinking, why my house? Why my bed? There's something deeply unsettling about a stranger slipping in while you sleep, lying inches away even now. I wonder if he was watching me before he dozed off. Did he stand over me at any point? Rio Grande City has never felt truly dangerous to me, even though I've wanted to leave for cooler weather and better pay. But now every rustle of the wind outside, every tap of a branch against the window sends me into a minor panic. I don't know if he'll come back. Part of me suspects he was just a drifter or someone with nowhere else to sleep. But then again, the idea that he chose my bed specifically haunts me. Maybe he'd been watching. Maybe he's still out there waiting for another chance. All I can do is keep the windows locked, try to breathe, and hope that eventually I can drift off to sleep without seeing his silhouette in my mind. My name is Kyle, and I live in a small apartment just outside of Louisville, Kentucky. Back in October of 2022, I was 24 years old and working part-time. While finishing my senior year of college, I wasn't exactly rolling in cash. So buying things secondhand online became my go-to. I was trying to get a new TV, and my friend recommended Craigslist. I hadn't really used it before, but I gave it a shot and found someone selling a nearly new Samsung TV for a price that felt almost too good to pass up. The seller called himself James, and he seemed normal enough when we texted. He even sent me pictures of the TV plugged in, playing Netflix and all that. It felt legit. We agreed to meet on a Wednesday evening. He suggested meeting in a public place, the parking lot of an old strip mall near the edge of town. It wasn't exactly deserted. There was a gas station across the street, but the lot itself had been empty for months. I figured it would be safe enough because cars drove by regularly on the nearby main road. Still, when I pulled in just after 9:30 p.m., the emptiness of the place started to bother me. I parked my car under one of the few functioning streetlights and checked my phone. James had texted he was on his way, running just a bit late. The longer I waited, the more uncomfortable I felt. The silence pressed in, broken only occasionally by passing traffic. I told myself it was just nerves, nothing more. A few minutes later, a dark SUV pulled into the lot, slowly stopping at the far end, near a closed grocery store. I could barely see through the tinted windows, but I figured it had to be James. When no one got out, after a minute or so, uneasiness settled into my stomach, just as I was about to text him. The driver's door opened and a tall guy stepped out. He waved at me, but he kept his distance. He gestured for me to come closer toward his SUV. I hesitated for a second, then reminded myself that I wanted this TV, so I swallowed my nervousness and approached cautiously. I noticed James kept glancing around the lot like he was checking for other people when he saw I was alone. Something about his posture shifted. I could feel tension building in the pit of my stomach, but I brushed it off. I convinced myself it was just nerves from meeting a stranger at night. When I got closer, I saw the back door of his SUV was open, and there was a large cardboard box inside it. Looked big enough to hold a TV, but something felt off about the setup. James stood near the vehicle, hands in his pockets, smiling slightly. He greeted me casually and stepped aside to let me inspect the TV. I leaned in and looked at it carefully. It seemed fine at first glance, but there was something strange. The TV was dusty, as though untouched for weeks. It looked different from the pictures he sent before I could process it. I felt something cold pressed firmly against the small of my back. At that moment, the world slowed down. My thoughts raced wildly. My brain quickly registered the reality. James wasn't here to sell a TV. He told me quietly to hand over my wallet, phone, and keys. His voice was calm, steady, and practiced. I obeyed, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I placed my belongings in his open palm. He said nothing else, just nudged me hard, causing me to stumble forward onto the pavement. My knees scraped painfully, and I heard him climb into his car and slam the door shut. Tires screeched as he sped off, leaving me alone under the pale glow of the street lamp. My breath came in a short gasp as I tried to calm myself to steady my shaking hands enough to call the police. My phone was still clenched tightly in my fist, and I realized James hadn't taken it, only my wallet with all my cash and cards. Police arrived shortly after I called them. I recounted what had happened, feeling embarrassed and angry at myself for falling into this trap. They took my statement and promised they'd look into it, but I saw skepticism in their eyes. I knew they'd probably never find the guy. There were no plates, no clear description, nothing solid to go on. Days later, I was cleaning up my apartment when I finally decided to delete James' messages, wanting to erase the entire incident from my mind. As I scrolled through our conversation, I noticed something I hadn't before. In one of the original photos James had sent me, there was a slight reflection on the TV screen, a silhouette barely visible. In the background, I zoomed in, feeling my pulse quicken as the blurry outline became clearer. Standing behind him, partially hidden by shadows, was another figure holding something long and slender in one hand. My mind raced with questions. Had there been someone else waiting in the SUV that night? Was I luckier than I realized? The realization that the robbery could have ended so much worse lingered heavily. Maybe the cold metal pressed to my back hadn't been a gun at all. Maybe they'd had something else planned, something worse, before we dive into the next story. If you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. Your support means the world to us. So please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. My name is Matt Reynolds, and I'm a junior at the University of Colorado Boulder. Most days, my routine is pretty mundane. I wake up too early for my 8 o'clock lecture skip breakfast and rush across campus after sitting through mind-numbing PowerPoints. I spend hours holed up in the library. Whenever I pass classmates in the hall, we just nod or exchange a quick, "Hey." I've never really formed a close bond with anyone. That emptiness hit harder than ever on my 22nd birthday, December 2nd, 2023. I realized I had no friends to celebrate with, and the loneliness felt suffocating. I decided to do something on my own, a short getaway to Roosevelt National Forest. My dad had always encouraged me to explore Colorado's great outdoors, and I thought maybe a camping trip would lift my spirits. I packed up my old Honda Civic with a tent, some food, and my dog Clyde, a scruffy mutt who's been my one true companion since high school. We arrived at the campsite late in the afternoon. The tall pines rustled under a sky that looked like it was going to snow. I set up my small tent near a fire ring, feeling a slight chill in the air. Clyde darted around, sniffing everything, wagging his tail like he was already in heaven. Part of me felt guilty for dragging him out into the cold, but he seemed thrilled by the time I got a small campfire going. It was already dusk. The forest was quiet except for the occasional crackle of burning wood. I remember wishing Dad was here. He'd always talked about teaching me how to handle wildlife. He even offered his old hunting rifle for protection, but I'd shrugged it off now. I kind of wished I had it while I warmed my hands by the fire. Clyde started growling. He was facing a line of trees just beyond the flicker of the flames. His ears were pinned back, and he looked tense, like he was ready to pounce. I squinted into the darkness and thought I saw something move, a fleeting shift of shadows among the branches. That's when I noticed two bright glints of light. They looked like distant reflectors, just hovering. My stomach felt weird. It was only a couple of seconds before they blinked, and I realized they were eyes. Part of me wanted to stand up and shout. Clyde barked and stepped forward. I wished I could have grabbed my dad's gun just then, but it was back home, safely locked in a cabinet, completely useless to me now. Without warning, the eyes drifted closer, and a massive, lean shape emerged into the edge of the fur light. It was a mountain lion. I'd heard about them around here, but never actually seen one up close. The cat's muscles rippled beneath its tawny fur, and I felt my whole body tense. It was obviously sizing me up, probably deciding if I was worth the effort. Then it lunged, covering the distance between us in seconds. Clyde let out this deep, furious bark and leaped right into its path. Everything after that turned chaotic. There was snarling, a blur of movement, Clyde's barks turning into a pained yelp in the glow of the flames. I saw the lion clamp its jaws around my dog and drag him back into the darkness. I remember standing there totally frozen. My body felt stuck, like my brain was trying to scream at me to do something, but I just couldn't. The forest grew silent again. Apart from my gasping breath, I called out Clyde's name, but all I heard was the rustle of branches fading deeper into the woods. The rest of the night I stayed by the dying fire, tears running down my face. I didn't dare move. I was terrified the lion might return, and I had no way to fight it off. Every snap of a twig made me flinch, my thoughts bouncing between horror and guilt. Clyde gave up everything for me, and I just stood there like a statue in the morning. The sun's weak light finally crept across the campsite. I felt numb. My backpack lay on the ground, still half zipped with my gear scattered. At some point, I must have knocked it over in a panic. My legs shook as I packed up my tent, glancing around in vain hope that Clyde might come limping back. But there was no sign of him. I left Roosevelt National Forest that day, wishing I'd never come out here alone. Ever since then, my sleep has been fitful. Whenever I shut my eyes, I see those glowing eyes in the dark, and I hear Clyde's final bark echoing through the trees. I've told myself 100 times it was just a freak accident, but part of me wonders if the lion is still lurking, prowling near the same spot, waiting for whoever's careless enough to show up without a weapon. Sometimes late at night, I catch myself listening for Clyde's familiar footsteps or the soft thump of his tail against my bedroom wall. But all I hear is silence, and in that silence, I swear, I can feel those eyes watching me from some hidden place. I can't reach a reminder of what I lost and what might still be waiting out there. I started writing this September 23rd, but never got around to sharing it until now. Let me start by saying that I live in an apartment complex by a golf course club on the edge of town. Since not many people live in this area, it can get pretty quiet at night. The complex is built partially into a small hill at the end of a road, with my apartment being on the back corner of the building on the ground floor. So the bottom of the windows in the living room and both bedrooms start literally a few inches above the ground. Outside, there is also a trail behind my apartment building that goes through a small wooded patch. I don't have much of a view since my living room windows face a good 15-20 patch of grass before a tree line separating it from a few houses on the next street. Over this story has been ongoing for the last couple of months. Not entirely sure if this is just paranoia or coincidental. Last summer, a family moved into a house on the next street over a couple of houses down from my apartment. I've only seen one middle-aged man and a dog so far. I was taking my shoe Harley outside one day while he was out in his backyard, just standing with his arms crossed, swaying side to side like an NPC character in 2000s video games, waiting to be interacted with. The dumpster shed area of the complex is in view of his backyard. We made eye contact, so I awkwardly waved and then just looked at my phone while Harley did her business. But I could tell from my peripheral vision that he didn't look away from us. We have the same breed of dogs, so I just assumed he was probably thinking of letting them meet sometime, but I wondered why he didn't have his dog outside with him. I just went back inside quickly. After Harley was done, my younger brother lives in the same complex as I do, but on the second floor, he told me that now and then he'd see that man take his dog out into his backyard, but then cross the tree line into the complex yard. He would circle around slowly, a little too close to the building, before going back to his house in September when I first started writing this, my BF at the time, and I split up the night I told him to leave. I went to a friend's house event. I didn't want to leave Harley home alone too long, so after about an hour or so, I came back to my app. I knocked out on the couch while I had a black screen rain sound video on YouTube. I woke up around 2 a.m. to Harley going crazy, barking and growling. The other couch is right under the main window in my living room. Harley had climbed up the couch and was barking at the window between the curtains. I got up to get her down and be quiet when my stomach dropped, as I realized something. The curtains are on the thinner side, and I can normally faintly see the streetlights from the next street over through the curtains. I started getting a little nervous, realizing that there was a black mass blocking some of the lights above. Where Harley was standing, I grabbed the remote to shut the TV off while I was getting closer to the window. The TV turns off in the style of retro TVs where the picture closes in on itself. When I turned it off, the flash animation on the TV illuminated the room briefly. It was enough that I was able to make out the form of someone dressed in black. Dark clothes, crouched down and looking into my window. In the flash, they probably saw me too, because they ran away quickly. I picked up Harley and ran to the kitchen to grab a knife and went to my room, locking the door. I texted my ex, asking him if he was outside of the window. Just then he replied back, "No," and asked what was happening. I didn't believe him because he's never awake that late, and told him I was about to call the police to just tell me the truth. He told me that I should call them either way and sent me his live location, showing that he was at his friend's house over an hour away. I called the police and let them know I had seen someone outside my window. They came and looked around, finding nothing. Obviously, they left and said they'd keep someone in the area to just call back if anything else happened. Over the next couple of weeks, around the same time, 2 to 3 a.m., each night Harley would freak at the window. By the time I got to her, I couldn't see anyone outside. Fast forward to May 2024. I went through my storage closet and found some of my ex's things. I was out with some friends when he came to pick them up. He ended up texting me to come home so we could talk about something important. I get home and I notice that he has a puzzled look on his face. I asked what couldn't have been just a text. He told me that while he was loading his stuff in his truck, he took Harley out quickly. He was approached by an older lady who lives on the second floor. The dumpster's at the end of the parking lot, and if you turn right, you'll face the side of the building. In the general area outside my living room window, a few big trees are keeping the area back there dark. Even during the summer, it's deeply shaded. She said that when she was taking her trash out, she heard a twig snap and looked in the direction it came from. She said she saw a man outside my window, not just walking around. He was up close, peering into my living room, one hand up on the window trying to block the light so he could see, and his phone in the other hand pointing inside my apt. She yelled out, asking him what he was doing, but he just acted like he didn't hear her and walked away slowly in the opposite direction. She said it would be one thing if he was just walking through the yard and glanced over at my window, but he was full on pressing his face against the glass looking in. I have since bought a stand-up Ring camera facing out my window now, which is something I should have done a long time ago. It's just the thought of someone invading my privacy and just watching and recording me through the window was really unsettling every Halloween. My neighborhood throws a massive celebration. It's become a tradition that grows bigger each year. Food trucks lining the streets, live music echoing into the late hours, and games scattered across nearly every lawn this particular year. The party was hosted by Jason, a neighbor who lived just 3 houses down from mine. Jason was in his early 40s, a large man with a loud voice and a reputation for having a short temper. Most of the neighbors knew him as someone who could explode easily over the smallest things. I'd witnessed him losing control several times at previous gatherings, usually over arguments or minor misunderstandings. Even though his parties were fun, there was always a subtle tension underneath that. Halloween night, I arrived at Jason's front yard with my friend Ben. Just after sunset, the evening air was crisp and cool, filled with the faint scent of fallen leaves. Kids dressed in colorful costumes ran around excitedly, their laughter filling the streets. Adults gathered in small groups, chatting and enjoying the festive atmosphere. Jason had even rented a bounce house for the neighborhood kids set up in his backyard next to a wooden deck. The party was already lively when Ben and I joined. Music played loudly through speakers placed around the yard. orange lights strung along fences and trees, giving everything a cheerful glow. We greeted familiar faces, chatted casually, and watched the neighborhood enjoy the festivities. People mingled, smiling and sharing stories as the evening went on. After a while, Ben and I moved to the quieter front yard area, away from the crowded backyard. We preferred the relaxed pace there, talking comfortably and enjoying the evening at a distance from the louder guests as we stood chatting. I noticed another neighbor named Fred wandering around nearby. Fred, about 30 years old and known as a troublemaker, since childhood had always been enthusiastic about Halloween tonight. He was dressed as some type of clown, complete with messy smudge face paint from hours of partying. He stumbled awkwardly, bumping into others and laughing loudly, clearly intoxicated by something or simply caught up in his usual recklessness. At one point, Fred approached Ben and me, tapping me heavily on the shoulder. His eyes looked glassy, unfocused, as he mumbled an invitation to join him. Inside the bounce house, politely but firmly, we declined. Fred shrugged it off, laughed strangely, and wandered back toward the backyard. A few moments later, loud shouting erupted from behind Jason's house. At first, I thought it might be another typical argument that often occurred at Jason's gatherings. Then suddenly, two teenage girls burst around the side of the house, running past us in a state of panic. Their faces were pale and frightened. My heart began beating faster, sensing something seriously wrong, exchanging worried glances. Ben and I quickly headed toward the noise. When we reached the backyard, a chaotic scene met us. Neighbors scattered in every direction, their faces full of fear and confusion. My stomach tightened painfully as I saw what had caused the panic. Fred stood alone, breathing heavily with a look of rage, distorting his painted face into something nightmarish in his hands. Clearly visible, even in the dim lighting, was a real AK-47 rifle. It felt impossible to comprehend, as if my mind refused to accept the reality of the situation unfolding before me. We learned later how it had started. Fred had climbed into the bounce house, becoming rowdy and scaring some of the children inside. Jason had confronted him, demanding that he leave immediately. Fred stubbornly refused, shouting insults. Jason, along with his friend, a police officer attending the party, while off duty, physically removed Fred from the bounce house, embarrassed and furious. Fred stormed off to his house nearby. No one anticipated what he would do next. Standing there frozen in Jason's backyard, I watched helplessly as Fred waved the weapon around, yelling threats and curses at no one in particular. The joyful atmosphere had vanished, completely replaced by silent dread, broken only by Fred's angry shouts. People hid behind fences and parked cars, urgently calling the police on their phones, eyes wide with disbelief. Minutes dragged on painfully. I kept wondering if Fred might open fire at any second, afraid to even move eventually. The unmistakable flashing lights of police cars pierced through the dark trees lining our street. Officers quickly rushed toward the backyard, their voices firm and clear, ordering Fred to drop his weapon. For a tense moment, Fred hesitated, seemingly unsure of what to do next. Then, as officers moved closer, he finally set the gun down. Police swiftly surrounded him, placing him under arrest without anyone getting hurt. We had narrowly escaped a tragedy. The party ended abruptly, replaced by a sense of relief mixed with lingering fear. Neighbors quietly left Jason's home, whispering anxiously and comforting those who had been terrified. The Halloween excitement we had felt earlier now seemed distant and unreal. Years have passed since that night. Yet I often replay the scene in my mind. The image of Fred standing there, face distorted in anger, holding a deadly weapon, still haunts me. It reminds me how quickly ordinary events can become dangerous, and how thin the line between safety and tragedy truly is now. Every Halloween, when the neighborhood begins preparing decorations and planning celebrations, I'm reminded of that night, and even though nothing like it has happened since, a quiet sense of caution remains. The neighborhood parties continue, but for me, they never quite feel the same again. It was a chilly October afternoon as I made my way home from school. My backpack slung over one shoulder, the leaves crunched beneath my sneakers, and the air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, having just started high school. Everything felt fresh and thrilling, yet there was an oddness to it all. The school building loomed ahead like a massive shadow against the setting sun, and whispers about the forgotten school began to creep into my thoughts. I'm Ethan, a typical high school student, and like most teens, I was preoccupied with the usual concerns, grades, girls, and fitting in. But soon something darker began to occupy my mind. Rumors had been circulating among students about strange occurrences in the old school wing, which had been shut down for years. No one openly discussed it, but I could sense the hushed conversations and exchanged glances in the hallways, and my curiosity was piqued when I got home. I tossed my backpack onto the floor and grabbed a bag of chips. I could hear my little brother Tommy laughing as he watched cartoons, filling the room with his joy. My mom was in the kitchen humming softly. As she prepared dinner, I felt the urge to share what I knew about the old school wing, but who would actually believe me? My friends Jude and Matilda were always up for my wild ideas. They loved adventure and were eager to uncover the unexpected the next day at lunch as we sat at our usual table. I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. Have you guys heard about the old wing? I asked in a hushed tone. Yeah, I've heard stories about it. Everyone says it's haunted, Matilda replied, raising her eyebrows. Jude chuckled as he chewed on his food. Do you guys really buy into that stuff? Maybe we should check it out, I said, feeling a rush of excitement. What if there's actually something there? After a bit of back and forth, Matilda and Jude finally agreed. As the school bell rang, we quickly made a plan to sneak into the old wing. After classes, our hearts raced as we grabbed our flashlights and met at the back entrance. Once the final bell rang, the hallway leading to the old wing was dim and dusty with peeling paint on the walls. A cold draft swept through, making the hairs on my neck stand up. We moved cautiously, our flashlights flickering in the darkness. This place is super creepy, Matilda whispered, her voice shaky. I tried to calm her down, reminding her to stick together, but I felt a bit scared too. We walked slowly, the sound of our footsteps echoing, adding to the tension in the air. When we reached the entrance of the old wing, I spotted a rusty sign hanging crookedly above the door that read, "Authorized personnel only." My heart raced at the sight. I pushed the creaky door open, and a musty smell of rotten wood and mildew hit us as we stepped inside. The air felt thick and still, and the light from our flashlights danced across the dirty floors and cracked walls. I suddenly noticed something shiny in the corner of the room, partially hidden under a pile of ashes. Curious, I walked over to investigate and then called my friends to join me. They both hurried over, and together we uncovered an old yearbook. The pages were yellowed and worn out. As I flipped through it, we saw photos of students from the past, their faces filled with joy and carefree smiles. But then we stumbled upon a page that unsettled me. It was dedicated to a tragic event, a fire that had occurred in the old school, claiming the lives of several students a few years back. What happened? Her eyes wide with fear. Just then we heard a strange noise behind us, a low creaking sound like a door. Slowly moving on its hinges, we froze and turned to see the door we had entered through closing on its own. The wind howling outside, Jude wondered if either Matilda or I had closed the door. I shook my head and panic began to rise in my chest. The air felt heavy and an uneasy tension surrounded us when Matilda's flashlight flickered. Adding to the creepy atmosphere, she insisted we needed to leave right away. As we turned to go, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into darkness. My heart raced as we scrambled to turn them back on. This isn't funny, Jude shouted, his voice shaking as he struggled with his flashlight. Just then, a faint whisper seemed to echo through the room, growing louder as if it was surrounding us. "Please help us." All three of us looked at each other, our eyes wide with terror. Then our instincts kicked in, and we bolted for the door, crashing into walls and dodging falling debris. When we finally reached the door, it swung open with a loud bang, as if it had been waiting for us. We scrambled out of the room and down the hall, the whispering fading behind us once we were outside. The cool night air hit us, and I gulped it in my heart. Still racing, we all collapsed on the grass, panting heavily. "What just happened in there?" Matilda asked. "I don't know, but we shouldn't have gone there." I admitted to my friends from that day on. I knew the old wing held secrets that were best left undiscovered. It was a part of my school's history that demanded respect. All three of us agreed never to return, and I often wondered if those whispers we heard were the voices of lost students calling for help, or something darker. When October came to a close, the chill in the air reminded me of our adventure, and it left a mark on me. I felt a strange curiosity about the mysteries hidden within those walls. Silence fell between us all as we finally began to process what we had experienced together. Bound by a terrifying secret that would haunt us or perhaps unite us for a long time to come. I remember thinking it was going to be the perfect arrangement. My friend Robert, someone I'd known for about a year, needed a roommate at the University of Pennsylvania's Lincoln Hall, and I needed a spot in the dorms. He was majoring in information technology, just like me, and had even helped me install Arch Linux on my laptop. It felt like a win-win at first. In those early weeks, things seemed okay. We'd both head out to our coding classes, sometimes grab a bite in the cafeteria, and occasionally talk about new software or console games. However, as time went by, I started noticing strange behaviors in Robert. He had this rule: lights out at exactly 11 p.m. Not 11:01. Not even 11 and 10 seconds if I so much as rustled a piece of paper. After that time, he'd lose his temper. I'd never seen him that angry before, and I could tell something was off. A few weeks later, I realized a $50 bill from my wallet was gone. Initially, I convinced myself I'd misplaced it. My winter coat had so many pockets that maybe it slipped out. But then Robert kept asking to borrow more and more of my bus pass, my headphones, even suggesting I purchase expensive items for him that he'd pay me back for later. It was odd he promised to return the bus pass 3 days later, but when I tried to collect it on the 4th day, because I needed it to reach a potential job at McDonald's, he held on to it like it was his. I remember asking him repeatedly, maybe 20 or more times, and by the time he finally gave it back, I'd missed the bus and had to walk through snow that reached up to my knees. By then, I was starting to feel trapped between the strict bedtime rule and these little financial red flags. I no longer felt comfortable in my room, but I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I knew he was on a new set of medications that could cause mood swings, so I tried to empathize. Unfortunately, things only got worse. We both had handheld gaming consoles, and Robert was eager to do a trade. He wanted my brand new Nintendo 3DS from cartridges. Galore cost me about $109, and he promised to give me his 2DS. In return, we agreed on a quick system transfer, so I let him hold both temporarily. Days passed though, and he insisted on keeping both devices. That felt like the final straw when I threatened to call the police. He scoffed like I was overreacting, but I did call them, and they directed me to the dorm counselors. Thankfully, they helped me get the 2DS back without much trouble, though the officer said it was a civil matter. One evening after I had come back from a late shift at McDonald's, Robert stormed in, slamming the door so hard it rattled my desk. He didn't physically attack me, but the fury in his eyes and the sheer force with which he closed that door almost sent me into a panic. I have pretty severe PTSD, and I just froze in my spot. My heart thumped so loudly I was sure he could hear it all. I could think about was how trapped I felt in that tiny dorm. He left the room a few moments later, probably to go to the bathroom, and I darted under my bed, staying there for what felt like hours. I was terrified he'd come back and start screaming again, or do something worse by the time morning rolled around, and he left for class. My body was cramped from staying curled up. My mind was set I needed out. I called my psychiatrist and explained the situation. Within a day, the school received a note confirming I had to be moved to a private dorm for my own well-being. It was a huge relief to see that new set of keys in my hand. I packed everything in a hurry, hardly caring if I folded my clothes neatly. My only goal was to never step back into that suffocating environment. When my mom called later, I couldn't tell her the truth. I fed her some excuse about loud music and racial slurs from the neighbor next door, which wasn't the whole story. Even though she heard the nervousness in my voice, I guess she decided not to push. I felt guilty, but I also didn't want to relive the anxiety of explaining how a supposed close friend turned manipulative and frightening. It's been a while now, but I still sometimes catch myself wondering if Robert really took that $50 bill, or if maybe one of his friends did. The question haunts me more than it should. Maybe it's because I don't like facing the idea that someone I trusted was capable of using me, like that I'm sharing this in the hope that people learn from my experience. No matter how well you think you know someone, you never truly see all sides of them until you're sharing tight quarters under stressful circumstances. It doesn't always have to be supernatural or dramatic to be terrifying. Sometimes it's the slow, subtle dread that really gets to you.